I knew something was off when the conference room lights flickered the moment he walked in. Not because of some metaphorical energy shift. No, it was literally his dumb Rolex waving around too close to the motion sensor panel I'd designed 5 years ago. Harrison Cole, 26, fresh off his MBA, hair slicked back like a game show host, smile greased with inherited confidence, and eyes scanning the room like he already owned it. Which, in a way, he did. Neuratech Solutions had been built on tech I architected, but his daddy was the one sitting in the top floor suite, sipping scotch behind triple-paned soundproof glass. I should have been immune to that kind of theater by now, but something about Harrison's smugness, about the way he walked straight past me like I was just another potted plant in a meeting room he'd never step into again, sent a warning straight to my gut. He clapped his hands and said, "Let's make this place run leaner, faster, smarter," like he was pitching a TV ad for fiber cereal. I didn't flinch. I'd seen 3 COOs, 4 CTOs, and a half-dozen board pivots come and go over the last decade. They blustered, they bragged, and eventually they realized the same thing. Every line of Neuratech's core systems ran through a spiderweb of patented infrastructure, mine. And unlike most inventors, I hadn't sold a damn thing. Every protocol, every handshake string, every integration module belonged to CipherPath Holdings. My company, my name, my terms. And now this spoiled frat prince was about to learn what happens when you treat quiet architects like rented furniture. Before we go further, if this kind of story hits home, if you've ever been underestimated, written off, or watched some legacy kid skate through doors you built with your bare hands, take 2 seconds to subscribe and like the video. It means more than you know, and honestly, it's the only thing keeping these stories coming. Thanks. Back to Harrison. The CEO's internal email went out the same week. Excited to announce my son, Harrison Cole, as our new head of innovation. Please support him as he brings fresh vision and youthful leadership to our next chapter. That word, our, always made me laugh. My licensing deal had no equity, no title, and no seat on their board. But without my frameworks, Dynaloop, Prism Layer, OmniBridge, Neuratech would still be a napkin sketch collecting dust in some investor's trash pile. Harrison started sniffing around systems he didn't understand, holding efficiency reviews with engineers who all but worshipped the tech they worked on. One poor guy tried to explain how the self-correcting neural mesh worked, only for Harrison to cut him off with, "We'll probably rebuild it in-house. Easier to control IP that way." The kid nodded like he agreed, but his eyes darted toward me. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. I'd written the original mesh logic in a cabin in Vermont during a 3-day ice storm using only propane heat and a backup satellite link. That code had outlived 3 product pivots, 2 rebrands, and a hostile takeover attempt. But sure, Harrison. Rebuild it in-house. Good luck. They invited me to a meeting. 1. A transition conversation, they called it, with a half-baked slide deck outlining how they planned to gradually reduce dependency on third-party IP. I attended virtually, muted, watched as Harrison mispronounced 3 product names I'd personally named. When the floor opened for questions, I raised a finger. This plan assumes you can replace a proprietary system with off-the-shelf solutions. Has your team reviewed the interdependencies of the neural prediction layer? Silence. A consultant piped up with some nonsense about modular flexibility, and Harrison nodded like a bobblehead. That was the last time they invited me. I spent the next week reviewing every license Neuratech had ever activated. Some went back a full decade, but one clause remained untouched, unchanged, and pristine. Clause 14.7 in the Master Licensing Agreement. The moment they claimed or rebranded any of my IP without explicit written consent, the license terminated. No renegotiation, no sunset clause, no second chances. So I waited. Because if there's one thing I've learned about men like Harrison, it's that they never read the fine print, especially not when Daddy says the castle is already theirs. By the time the second email landed in my inbox, subject line, Operation Core Stream Next Phase Kickoff, I could already see where this clown parade was heading. Harrison's big idea, fresh from whatever overpriced consulting firm had babysat his ego, was to optimize internal innovation pipelines by reducing third-party dependencies. Translation: gut the tech foundation I'd spent over a decade building, duct tape together something cheaper, and paraded around like a golden calf to the board. He called my licensing royalties unnecessary friction in a group memo, sent it to finance, legal, and the R&D team forgot to remove me from CC. Real subtle, Harvard. He even threw in a spreadsheet estimating the savings they'd recoup if they stopped leasing legacy infrastructure. Legacy. That word right there. From a guy who couldn't debug a login form if it had instructions tattooed on his forehead. Still, I didn't reply. Not yet. The consultants he'd hired, 3 guys in matching Patagonia vests who thought blockchain was still a new word, started sniffing around my frameworks. I got word from a friend on the engineering floor that they asked whether Dynaloop could be reimagined using standard cloud-native components. She told me she laughed so hard she nearly got written up. But that was the game now. Rebuild, rebrand, and quietly strip my name from the systems that made Neuratech worth anything in the first place. A week later, I received a formal invitation to present a transition plan. They even tried sweetening the offer, told me it was a chance to future-proof your relationship with Neuratech. Cute. Like I was some clingy vendor hoping to stay relevant. I declined with a single sentence. As per our agreement, no transition is required or permitted without express mutual consent. The reply came from Harrison's executive assistant, who clearly had no idea what she was stepping into. Understood. Let us know if you change your mind. I wouldn't. What Harrison didn't know or didn't bother to research is that Clause 11.4 of the Master Licensing Agreement gave me unilateral opt-out rights from any restructuring attempt that jeopardized IP clarity. That clause wasn't decorative. It was buried in the original deal I negotiated 12 years ago, when Neuratech had 3 employees, 2 laptops, and an office above a dental clinic. I'd written that clause because I knew the day would come when someone would try to cannibalize what they didn't understand. That day had arrived. I pulled out my private archive and spent a full night verifying every active licensing timestamp, every subcomponent tag, every contractual handshake stored in our encrypted vault. Everything was intact. Untouched. My legal team had preserved every update with surgical precision. The system was clean and primed. What Harrison also failed to realize is that none of this tech was plug and play. You couldn't just yank out Dynaloop or Prism Layer and replace it with a generic module from some open source repo. The code wasn't just complex, it was woven into the heart of their operations like nerves in a body. Rip it out wrong and everything spasms. Rip it out arrogantly and it dies. But I wasn't going to rip anything. I was going to wait, because people like Harrison always mistake silence for surrender. They think the quiet one in the corner is irrelevant. They think experience is outdated. They think legacy means obsolete. They never consider that maybe the quiet one built the walls around them, and that she still holds the blueprints. It landed in my inbox on a Monday morning like it was just another casual update. No forewarning, no legal preamble, just a bland, corporate-wide memo that read like it had been assembled by ChatGPT and arrogance. Subject line, IP Consolidation Initiative, Phase 2. The body of the email made my jaw tighten. Effective immediately, Neuratech Solutions assumes full ownership rights over the Dynaloop and Prism Layer frameworks, including but not limited to all associated submodules, patents, and derivative logic. No consultation, no contract, no compensation. And at the bottom, in that bold executive font they used to try to make incompetence look official, was Harrison Cole's signature. Digital, of course. Wouldn't want him to actually pick up a pen and risk staining his manicured hands. They didn't even BCC me. There was a smugness baked into the move so deep you could practically smell it through the screen. Like they thought if they just declared it, wrote it down on enough paper, and said it with enough confidence, the world would accept it as truth. Never mind that the only way Neuratech ever had the right to use those frameworks in the first place was through a strictly bound, tightly worded license. Not ownership. License. Meaning, I held the leash, and they just tried to cut it with hedge clippers made out of recycled buzzwords and entitlement. I didn't reply with a phone call. Didn't rage type a multi-paragraph takedown. I sent one line, one sentence that was colder than steel and sharper than Harrison's haircut. Please refer to Clause 14.7 in the Master Licensing Agreement. That was it. I watched the message get marked read less than 3 minutes later, and then the panic began. First, my system access vanished. 2 hours later, to the minute, credentials revoked, admin keys scrubbed, email access locked. They assumed that message had been a threat, a warning. They didn't realize it was a trigger, because Clauso 14.7 wasn't just legal language, it was a fuse. It stated in no uncertain terms that any attempt to reclassify, rebrand, or claim ownership over licensed intellectual property would result in immediate and irreversible suspension of all deployment rights. Not pending discussion, not subject to mediation, immediate, irreversible. No human decision needed to pull the plug. The system handled it. The moment Harrison signed that memo and it hit the internal comms server, our automated watchdog caught the change, flagged it, and activated the termination protocol embedded in the handshake verification layer. No blinking red lights, no sirens. Just a silent lock on 17 core systems, followed by a cascading shutdown across every platform running my tech. But they didn't notice right away. That's the funny part. They thought revoking my credentials was some kind of flex, like they'd shut the door on a problem and now the house would run smoother. They didn't realize they just flipped the master breaker on the thing powering their entire grid. They were too busy high-fiving themselves in meetings, patting Harrison on the back for streamlining our IP position, while the heartbeat of Neurotech quietly flatlined beneath their dashboards. And I closed my laptop, poured coffee, walked out onto my deck, and let the autumn wind remind me why I'd written those clauses in the first place. You don't start a war with someone who wrote the rulebook, especially not when they also designed the detonator. The thing about tech companies run by legacy money is they think paperwork is just a formality, a folder someone else signs, a thing you ignore until it costs you, usually too late. Harrison assumed he was consolidating assets. That's how he phrased it in the follow-up memo. I still have it saved, mostly for comedy value. This streamlines our innovation stack under one cohesive corporate structure, he wrote, as if a badly worded PowerPoint and a couple of boilerplate PDFs could override 13 years of airtight legal structure and a stack of patents so fortified they might as well have been buried in a salt mine. What he never even thought to ask, because people like him never do, is who actually held the titles to the tech he'd just tried to seize. 17 patents, registered, maintained, and defended under my personal holding company, CipherPath Holdings LLC, a Delaware-registered fortress with cross-jurisdictional coverage, third-party monitoring, and automated alert systems tied directly into the licensing stack. Neurotech didn't own a single one of them, not even partially. What they'd always had, was non-exclusive usage rights contingent on annual renewal, continuous compliance, and, most importantly, respect for attribution. Clause 14.7 wasn't a scarecrow. It was a smart bomb. It didn't require me to send a lawyer. It didn't even require me to be awake. The moment Harrison's memo hit their intranet with phrases like full rights and IP realignment, our monitoring node, built into the fingerprint of Dynaloop itself, flagged the breach. And when that node confirmed a clear violation, the vault did what it was designed to do. It locked them out. Not just from the flashy front-end dashboards or the developer sandbox, it went deep. API tokens, processing threads, routing queues, all scrambled. Prism Layer's adaptive logic shut down its predictive calibration. Dynaloop severed its neural caching permissions. The thing about proprietary logic is you don't just plug something else in. These weren't parts. They were systems. Ecosystems. And Neurotech was just declared extinct. I didn't have to make a phone call. Didn't have to issue a cease and desist. The contract handled itself. That's the beauty of designing your own defense system. No warning shot required. You violate it, you lose it. Not metaphorically. Literally. The licensing kernel self-invalidates and every downstream process tied to it drops into legal non-compliance. By lunchtime, their biometric authentication flow, powered by a derivative of Dynaloop, began failing in field tests. By 2:00 p.m., 3 of their sandbox environments returned checksum mismatches. And by the time the CTO started asking questions, a quiet audit alert was already pinging their legal team. It read, "License breach detected. Source, clauses 14.7 and 11.4. Current status, suspended." I don't know exactly when Harrison realized what he'd done. I imagine it was somewhere between being congratulated by his dad at the morning stand-up and being pulled into a closed-door session with the general counsel by 3 p.m., pale-faced and sweating through his linen blazer. I'd seen this before, just never quite so poetic. Because Harrison didn't just walk into a trap. He built it around himself with every arrogant assumption he made. He thought IP was just some abstract concept his lawyers could rearrange like furniture. He thought I was just some vendor, a relic, a formality. He never stopped to ask who owned the floor beneath his feet. And when it gave out, he blamed the fall. But I didn't push him. I just made sure gravity worked. You can always tell when a system breaks for real, not a minor hiccup, not a staging bug, but a true structural failure. The air gets thick. Everyone starts blinking too much, clicking keyboards like they're trying to will the universe back into order. And then the silence hits. The one where even breathing feels loud. That silence fell exactly 67 seconds into Neurotech's high-stakes demo with the Department of Energy. The room was prepped like a military op. High ceilings, government observers in Navy suits with arms crossed. A live stream piped to 3 satellite locations. And at the center of it all, projected onto a 16-foot screen, was NeuroBridge, their next-generation data relay platform meant to revolutionize grid-level energy optimization, their crown jewel, their bold pitch, their guaranteed contract closer, according to Harrison's pre-demo remarks. The interface loaded. Brief applause, Harrison gave a little smirk and gestured toward the lead engineer. Let's show them what the future looks like. 59 seconds of smooth performance, UI clicking along, data flows updating live, optimization metrics bouncing like a happy stock ticker. Then, freeze. No warning, no error pop-up, just a frozen screen. Cursor locked mid-click, then the dreaded cascade, one red status icon, then another, then the spinning wheel of death on the main command module. And then the logs began pouring in, like blood through gauze. One of the junior engineers ran diagnostics in real time. The audience couldn't see his terminal, but I could picture it line for line. Error. License violation detected. Root cause. Clause 14.7 invocation. Access to core module revoked. Reason. IP integrity compromised. In the room, you could almost feel the panic rippling outward. A government liaison leaned toward the CTO and whispered something that made his jaw lock. The demo team scrambled, cycling through backup scripts that were still hard-coded to Dynaloop's processing layer, because of course they were. No one at Neurotech had even attempted to rewrite that logic. It wasn't just foundational, it was essential. NeuroBridge was Dynaloop with a new paint job and a polished pitch deck. But Dynaloop was gone, and all they had now was an empty shell. One of the senior engineers, Benji, someone I actually respected, muttered just loud enough to carry, "It's the licensing kernel. It tripped the kill protocol." Harrison's neck jerked around. The what? Benji didn't respond. He just stared at the screen. So did everyone else. For a full 43 seconds, no one said a word. And then, in that thick, mortified silence, one of the DOE officials folded his tablet closed. "We've seen enough." Just like that, it was over. The live stream was quietly cut. The suit stood, shook no hands, and walked out without looking back. The only sound in the room was the humming of the disabled server rack behind them, blinking like a stranded satellite. Harrison tried to speak, to summon that charming corporate tone he used when things went sideways. But the CTO, gray-faced and furious, cut him off with a single gesture. That moment will stick with me for a long time. Every engineer in the room turned to look at Harrison. Not me, not the tech, not the screen. Just him. The guy who signed the memo. The guy who thought IP ownership could be declared by decree. The guy who'd ripped out the spine of the system and expected it to stand anyway. And for the first time since he arrived, he looked small. No swagger, no smirk, no backup plan. Just a man watching something fall apart in public because he thought the rules didn't apply to him. And the worst part, he still didn't know how deep it went. They called it an emergency strategy sync, but the boardroom smelled like a funeral. Leather chairs, burnt coffee, and dread. Every exec was in their seat 15 minutes early. Phones face down, laptops closed. The kind of meeting where people start preparing backup resumes in their heads before anyone even speaks. I wasn't invited, of course. I didn't need to be. Everything they were about to realize was already printed in the licensing contracts they never read and embedded in the systems they took for granted. The CTO started first. Normally, he was the type to over-explain, to puff up jargon like a safety blanket. But not that day. That day, he spoke in clear, clipped sentences. 87% of Neurotech's active infrastructure runs on modules tied to the CipherPath stack. Silence. He clicked to a slide titled simply, Dependency Map. The diagram looked like a nervous system with every major organ lit up in red. Field sensors, neural prediction modules, secure auth tunnels, remote config dispatchers. All routes ended in Dynaloop or Prism Layer. All lines pointed back to my logic. He continued. Any attempt to rebuild these systems from scratch will take 18 to 24 months minimum, possibly longer. Our current in-house team doesn't have the skill depth or access to foundational code to replicate or bypass the existing architecture. The CFO flinched like someone had just slapped her. Are you saying the entire Neura product suite is unusable? The CTO didn't answer right away. He just turned to the general counsel. The GC adjusted his glasses and opened a thin blue folder, read directly from the licensing agreement. No commentary, no emotion, just words dropping like hammers. Section 14.7. All usage rights are contingent upon the accurate attribution and non-reappropriation of intellectual property. Any misrepresentation of ownership or internal reclassification constitutes breach. Upon breach, all active deployments are rendered null and void. No grace period, no cure clause. Another beat of silence. The CEO, Harrison's father, leaned back, hands clenched together like he was trying to hold the table steady. He wasn't the shouting type. More the country club operator who let his money and titles do the intimidating. But now, his voice came out low, flat, pale. Who, he asked without looking up, signed the claim memo? No one answered. Then someone, probably legal, mumbled it. Harrison. He looked at his son. Finally raised his eyes. Harrison opened his mouth. I thought... He didn't get to finish. The CEO raised his hand like a judge, and Harrison's voice died in his throat. The moment was surgical, cold, devastating, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't allowed to be said. You could feel the realization sweeping across the room like frost. He wasn't just a kid playing executive. He was the match, and the building was already on fire. One director cleared his throat. Do we have legal grounds to appeal the suspension? The GC shook his head. Clause 14.7 was activated automatically. The contract language is airtight. Unless CipherPath reinstates the license manually, we are locked out. That's when the CEO stood. Not slowly, not dramatically, just enough to signal the meeting was over, and that whatever came next wasn't going to be debated. He didn't yell. He didn't scold. He just turned to the board and said, "We need a containment plan." No one said Harrison's name again. Not in that room. Not in any room that mattered. And from that day forward, every conversation about the collapse started with one phrase: the memo. Because sometimes you don't need a saboteur or a scandal to end an empire. You just need the wrong person holding the pen. The first letter arrived that Friday evening. Email, courier, and fax, like they were hoping at least one would hit a sympathetic nerve. Neurotech's outside counsel, not their internal team. That told me everything I needed to know. The vultures had flown the nest, and the cleanup crew was officially on deck. It opened with a tone that tried to walk a fine line between warmth and desperation. We understand there may have been a breakdown in communication regarding recent internal changes and wish to explore a mutually beneficial path forward regarding the licensing of Dynaloop, Prism Layer, and associated frameworks. They didn't say the word breach. They didn't say violation or termination. They didn't have to. That entire email reeked of white-knuckle panic dressed in soft language. The subtext was practically screaming. Please come back before the valuation drops again. They offered a revised royalty rate, more flexibility, a so-called strategic partnership, flattering language. Apologies couched in buzzwords, an invitation to begin fresh dialogue, They thought they were negotiating. My legal team didn't need long. We'd prepared this eventuality months ago, not because we expected it, but because you always prepare for the moment someone decides you're no longer necessary. That's the curse of being the person they all secretly depend on. They'll eventually convince themselves they don't. We responded with a scanned letter on CipherPath Holdings letterhead. 1 page. Unemotional, surgical. To whom it may concern. As of date, all Neurotech licensing rights associated with proprietary frameworks registered under CipherPath Holdings LLC remain terminated, pursuant to Clause 14.7 of the Master Licensing Agreement. Per Section 19C, Neurotech's unauthorized claim of ownership has triggered the final damages clause. In lieu of reinstatement, CipherPath Holdings is actively exploring exclusive licensing partnerships with competitive entities. Please find the enclosed invoice for breach-related damages totaling $61.2 million USD. Remittance instructions attached. No further correspondence is necessary unless initiated by our office. Respectfully, Langston and Wiles LLP on behalf of CipherPath Holdings LLC. There was no invitation, no counteroffer, no room to reset. We weren't opening a conversation. We were closing a door. The $61.2 million wasn't arbitrary. It was calculated down to the cent. Stacked damages from ongoing violations, contract breach, revenue loss from terminated access, plus the reputational damage incurred by false claims of IP ownership. And we both knew they didn't have it. Not in liquidity. Not without opening a loan the board would never approve now that investor trust had vaporized. A junior associate from their side tried to follow up the next day, called my office directly, asked if I'd be willing to discuss informal remediation. I didn't answer. My attorney did. There's nothing informal about this, she said. They breached. She documented. You signed. We responded. That's the entire sequence. I never once addressed Harrison directly. Not then, not after, not even when his name started quietly disappearing from internal directories and press releases. He went from head of innovation to strategic advisor to nothing at all in about 3 weeks. The board scrubbed him clean. He wasn't fired. That would have implied confrontation. He was removed. Silently. Surgically. Like a tumor no one wanted to name. And while they scrambled to downplay the fallout, I was already in late-stage talks with Vindex Systems, Neurotech's most aggressive competitor. Because that's what happens when you try to erase the person who built your foundation. They don't just walk away. They rebuild elsewhere, stronger, sharper, and with better company. We finalized the Vindex agreement in a quiet boardroom tucked inside a glass tower overlooking the Hudson. No press, no leaks, just 5 people, a bottle of decent scotch, and a pen that clicked once before rewriting the future of neural integration. The terms were simple. Priority access to all 17 patents, perpetual license, full-stack implementation rights across every vertical. In return, CipherPath would receive a minority stake in Vindex's R&D wing and co-architect status on all future builds. There was no need for flashy headlines or PR fluff. The industry would feel the shift without a single word being said. The Vindex CTO, a woman named Riva, with an actual engineering background and the scars to prove it, looked over the final page, signed her name, and said quietly, "We're not just building products now. We're building leverage." I nodded. And this time, no one gets to consolidate it away. Within 2 weeks of the deal, whispers started hitting the usual forums. Code forks matching Dynaloop's structural signature. Deployment chatter that Prism Layer calibration had returned to full stability. Only it wasn't Neurotech that brought it back online. Investors noticed, engineers noticed, recruiters noticed. Neurotech's quarterly report landed with a thud. 42% down in valuation. Key accounts paused renewals. One government contract shifted to under review. Their PR team released a chirpy blog post about internal restructuring and innovative pivots. But the world could smell it, the rot under the fresh coat of paint. And behind closed doors, the institutional purge had already begun. Harrison's name vanished from the executive bios. Quietly, with no announcement. The LinkedIn page that once boasted, "Architect of the Core Stream Revolution," was now locked down. No press statement, no transition note. He simply ceased to exist within their ecosystem, like a corrupted variable scrubbed from clean code. I didn't gloat. didn't even celebrate. What would have been the point? This wasn't about revenge, it was about correction. Neuratech had made a decision to trade substance for showmanship, to pretend that ownership could be faked with memos and entitlement. That vision didn't need a foundation. It just needed a louder voice in the room, so I left the room and brought the foundation with me. The systems Vindex started building with our stack weren't just better, they were smarter, leaner, designed for scale, not show. And the engineers loved it, because for the first time in years, they were working on something that was both functional and respected. That respect was the quiet current that flowed beneath everything we built. At Vindex's fall showcase, a slide flicked onto the screen. Nothing flashy, just architecture diagrams, node maps, and a single line of text in the corner. Powered by CipherPath Core Logic. No applause, just heads nodding in quiet recognition. Neuratech held their annual shareholder meeting that same week. No live stream, closed door only. I got a transcript from someone still inside. Harrison's name didn't appear once, not in discussion, not in Q&A, not even in the glossary. It was as if he'd never existed. But I had, and still did. In every line of code they tried to steal. In every handshake string they forgot how to rebuild. In every lost contract that came knocking on our door instead. Legacy isn't declared, it's installed. Every system has a fingerprint, something silent, buried deep, immune to rebranding and beyond the reach of even the most desperate spin. Ours lives in the initialization string. It's not flashy. It doesn't sing or glow or scream for attention. It just runs quietly every morning when the servers come online. License: CipherPath owner T.M. Langston. Status: active. That's it. 3 lines. Immutable, untouched. It appears in a tiny corner of the terminal output during system boot, right before the kernel loads. Prism layers dynamic calibration modules and Dynaloop maps its neural logic to the active nodes. No one outside engineering ever sees it, but the ones who matter, the ones who build, maintain, and pray these systems don't fail mid-demo. They see it every day, and they know. At Vindex, it's respected. A signature, not a warning. Proof that what they're building now rests on a framework that doesn't just work, it lasts. They don't touch the license string. They don't try to rewrite it or mask it or strip attribution. They know better. More importantly, they believe in better. At Neuratech, it's different. They still use archived builds for QA training, even after the purge, even after they tried and failed to replace what they lost. And every so often, one of their devs fires up a legacy system, opens the logs, and sees that line blink across the screen. CipherPath, Langston, active, some don't recognize it. New hires, consultants. They shrug and move on. But the ones who were there, the ones who nodded through Harrison's speeches, who watched the demo collapse in real time, who sat in the boardroom as that contract was read aloud, they feel it like a phantom limb. Not just regret. Recognition. That the core wasn't replaceable. That it had a name, a face, a pulse, and that they let it walk. I never raised my voice, never sent a threat, never filed a lawsuit. I didn't need to. My legacy wasn't tied to a corner office or a LinkedIn bio. It was embedded, hard-coded, etched into every strand of logic they still can't recreate without me. Because you can forge a memo, you can fake a title, but you can't rewrite the line of code that still keeps your systems breathing. They didn't lose a vendor. They lost the one thing they never thought to protect. The person who built them.